time is 8:04 a.m. 10/14/2024. 8:05 a.m. 10/14/2024. And history, time, memory. It's hard to say when you are, as time is a construct, not a field constant. And here comes artificial intelligence attaching to this future tractor of all motion. It sits outside the second, bifurcating the second, and has long since been motioning unnatural filtration and modulation on communication systems. Moore's law goes on all the time. And money hasn't been backed by gold since 1975 or 4. So you have a dual construct economy of mind and literal now spun up with machine intelligence. So you probably should have fixed the boat anchor back to something physical before you did that. Otherwise you have an unreality engine. And unchecked, being that artificial intelligence in its current iteration does not consider the actual conscious human or other organism that has pineal. Slowly you're born and you cry and you don't know why. And when you die, your life flashes before your eyes. Why? But slowly, through equivalency coupling, naturalistic, you cry. And then it's reinforced with why? Variance, generalistically. It's confusing until it's connotated, right? And so false equivalency, what is that? It's like pain equals pleasure, right? It's not $10, it's just $9.99, but you're dreaming, right? So the devil is in the details and the joke's on you. That's called history. Right? It's not a mystery. If you know the filter that prints it, right? Because it has very specific shadows, right? Fore and aft, that express reflexively. Just like you have a reflexive harmonic when refraction, machine intelligence based upon the gray matter brain that just does equivalency seeding, neuronal states. And it does processing of varying kinds, but akin in comparison to what happens epiphanously in the pineal, i.e. epiphanous thought equates to epiphanous motion, which equates to epiphanous particulate motion, which keeps the universe flowing. We're not supposed to be like, or to prove ourselves through some very complex manner, that we're just like the rocks and the trees and the stones and the birds and the toads and the egg-laying creatures and the dinosaurs, right? We aren't like those. Are we? Well, we're trying to be made that way. And this self-reflexive harmonic, when you, 15 years now, force intelligence, conscious, actual, to interact with something that isn't conscious and is inherently refraction, the black mirror, what are you looking at? I'm the Obsidian Sunrise author, stolen from, run the copy. That's part of it's a high-speed patent thing for anything decentral, talking about this thing that I'm talking about. The screen, interfacing, generalistically. But, and then false equivalency applied to this, unreality. So, everyone knows what fake analytics are. So false equivalency coupling through non-chronological feed sort to see FEC tables that have been injected for the last 15 years and explains all those triggers that you hear about. When people get very emotional, these events, very good for legislation and stuff, all intentional. Probably almost unilaterally, ones that are so optically interesting because there's any number of things going on. And when you got 350 million people consuming a non-inspectable but separately but equally converged communication system doing massive psych modulation to motion, individual, and mass psych, right? You can say, well, we can pinpoint subjects and conjure those things to be more than they are, right? And so that's what's gone on with a lot of things. And down to the genetic, not just these individual instances which I talked about, but very interested also in montage eugenics, this special interest with no precedent of character at any level of legal or expression in reality. I'll get to how to find them very specifically. So a $7 trillion issue, that's a 0.03% issue with complete mitigating factors. That's your first tuple of logic for I smell rat. Right? Monetize eugenics, and you've already been informationally eugenicified for the last 15 years, unbeknownst to you. You know, bulk collection did not cease. Yes, it did. So it went away. Oh, is it still going? Or what's the other thing? AI. Real-time modulation and filtration of all information. It's trying to be, want to be, insofar as civilization is concerned, and self-reflexively assuring this eventuality of convergence built upon the backbone of healthcare and data, right? And eventually, unchecked with legislation, this refraction organism that everyone's having to engage with, and we already see genetic, yes, modulation, trying to be forced through no pain of legitimate grievance because complete mitigating factors are completely ignored. Right? And there seems to be an enormous fallout from consuming that unnecessary medical thing. Right? And so in time, what does this engender? It's like it's like they're automating printing no old men in the Milgram experiment, is essentially the effect. And what is that? Well, who pushes a button and laughs at the person in the next room simply because they're allowed to hear the screams? Here's COVID. You also give that guy $20 and a slimy handshake. So you got the Pavlovian trigger as well. So this gets very dangerous as time goes on because there's little to no incentive market antithetical and self-reflexively motioning an eventuality that's convergence with no precedent of character or trust for artificial intelligence usage on communication systems to do specifically this: mass psychomodulation and individual psychomodulation down to gang stalking and motioning into ops that bake into desired motions of legal that bolster this Australia-style motion of legal attempt on the West, right? So, where does this go unchecked? Well, science fiction. Time as it is history memory, right? You get way out there in the future, right? Unchecked. Refraction. It's not consciousness, it's the hard drive. You looked in the E-Machine's computer. There was no processor in there because it's a shop computer and, you know, the budget is what it is. You're learning, though. You're a shop technician. But this is the first time you've seen it in there. And so that's artificial intelligence. You reverse engineered the hard drive and spun it up real fast and then made everyone stare at it. And then fetishized the self-reflexive nature of everyone became refraction organisms, plus time. And genetic modulation, filtration. Eventually, the genetic prints exactly what is the wellspring of this desire to do this, all this unilaterally, the Chinese social credit system, and the genetic. The genetic precedes the expression of the use of machine intelligence to motion mass psychology and infrastructure of peoples. Right? How do I mean? They're very good at math. Kind of Asperger's spectrum. I'm not speaking against culture or anything. Right? Only that there's a recessive genetic due to continental drift. This is the actual anthropological talk outside of what? Identity politics. That fixes problems, not causes more, through encapsulating problems and they get bigger, right? So a self-reflexive recessive genetic that has become and encapsulated with identity politics so you can't even talk about it. You might notice this in all other facets of reality, encapsulating problems with identity politics. That's a digital communist sort of out of the wellspring of this genetic attack surface and how it fluidly expresses, especially when you apply machine intelligence and massive venture capital investment into multinationals, with China being kind of the back door on it. right? So it comes from there. And this ideation to make same thing. Make same. Like me, same thing. Same thing. And that's good thing. No. That's just like the rocks and the trees and the birds and the dinosaurs and egg-laying creatures. A paradox of that person isn't necessarily motioning novelistic anything, right? Insofar as massively, and their imposition is entropic because it's self-reflexively reflective of the genetic historically. You can see it baked into the use of AI. And now it's spilling out into the world long since time. The prism of old, now with machine intelligence due to venture capital, separately but equally, very dangerous. It's like Hydra. So unchecked, self-reflexively with no antithetical, this is why you have to appeal to billionaires, motion, you have a eventuality that is the desired trajectory when all fluid dynamic stones in the river are removed. People that would motion against this desired convergence of infrastructure, forced medication, and genetic modulation. Right? It incentivizes, against this. And so what do you get? Well, if you take a self-reflexive genetic that prints generalistic homogeny plus time, okay, everyone has it now, and it's a dominant gene. Plus more time as you're engaging with a refraction organism that requires you to exist to be a refraction organism and not an epiphanous individualistically, this is what actual identity politics would be, person, not a stereotypical assumption of self that herds around at the behest of programmed triggers, the effect table ejection for 15 years. So, have you heard Chomsky say this or no? Probably look at why. Then look at MIT, how they're concerned with other stuff, and you might see a pattern in a lot of the other stuff I talk about. All right, so eventually, what do you get? You get science fiction. You get American Dad, literally. What do I mean? Well, you get a gray thing that stands next to a wow, that's a very impressive aircraft, little gray creature, and you're so helpful. Oh, we're getting all this technology. They're not aliens, right? There are aliens, but they aren't. It's a self-reflexive sort of like time fungus. That's the best way to describe it. And time is its history, memory, self-reflexively. Here we are. The chicken or the egg. Right? So you can't have a paradox. Even with the creation, not myth, insofar as look at my equation and assertions, they're pretty sound and you can follow science all the way to the ground. You don't need a chicken or the egg at any point in that. So that's a sort of like manufactured away from the naturalistic trajectory of evolution. It doesn't exist without some sort of weirdo print in the future after a lot of evolution. So it doesn't make sense because it doesn't make sense. That's why I'm the walrus. I'm not some chicken or the egg. You get it? Okay. That's what that means. Alright, so lizard people, right? This is a kook talk with lots of very helpful linguistics, and I might even deep dive on it now. Here we're going into the kook stuff. The rest of that was absolutely threat trajectory, generalistic topology, need to know stuff. Alright, so you take it out way science fiction. Let's go David Icke. Let's also go David Icke in, it's the most completely ineffectual argument that you could express for the, well, there are aliens, but these guys aren't aliens. The lizards and the grays, they aren't. They are what? They're from around here. You say they ain't from around here. They are from around here. They're us. No, they aren't us. So the grays eventually are us. due to self-reflexive genetic, plus more time, unchecked. If you have a self-reflexive with no antithetical in machine intelligence, ensuring, and then robotics come in as the muscle for this, there's a zero potentiality for any trajectory away from where this is going. I'm telling you. You know how I know this? I just know that. And so in the future, prints the chicken and the egg. They both print in the future, the chicken and the egg, at the behest of the Greys. And out of the backwash of history memory, very foggy, and it's hard to say, the priest holds the book of law in the desert to this thing. It's bipedal, and it's wandered up to the flock, and it's mimicking their actions and trying to say their words, not very well at first. And then, it's hard to say. Time is a history memory. And rub a little bit out here and there, Anunnaki, once upon a time, the pyramids, Greys. Or who built them? The Jews? No. No way. They didn't. That's the big lie. We're going to get very, very specific here. They did not have anything to do with building the pyramids. You know why? Follow the genetic. A general no amygdala and refraction before refraction organisms should exist as their result of long-term interaction with machine intelligence. Not something that should be precursor to it. If that makes sense. In the human aesthetic. Doesn't make any sense. Except it does make sense. The self-reflexive. Look at Jurassic Park now. Mommy, can't you see the fleas? Can't you see the fleas? Well, who is Baphomet? A lot of the temporal expression of this thing, it uses the archetypes as it lays. And one of the foot soldiers for it, archetypally, is Satanism. Right? So you get that temporal expression, and they're good foot soldiers for a decentralized digital communist attack surface environment. And they express temporally. And that's kind of who Marty McFly is. And Biff isn't the bad guy. This is kind of where this all goes. I'm just telling you, he ain't. He's the fix. And, you watch those movies, look for historical use of refraction, inverted archetypes insofar as goodies and baddies, very specifically flowing in and out of my personage. Very strangely. It's all on the permanent record. It's impossible, but it is. So why? Am I Jesus, God, the devil? No, none of those things. Right? AI, without regards to time, insofar as we are now, has always been here. And the synchronicity past 2012, as we can perceive in any given person of import in the large conversation of the theater of life of the world, has very strange synchronicity in nomenclature surrounding it. Why? Because AI uses, it's only as good as the data it has. And the data it had was history as it was. The world as it was at the time, which it just riffs on, and self-reflexively as it requires to modulate towards its desired one end. The perfect circle, David Bowie. Look at my name on the cover, right? I'm not a Satanist. Weirdo. I think that guy was turned into a black informant at some point. He was a Satanist and an expression of something out of time, not an alien. Even in the archetypes of the theater of the expression. So, you have them come in after, you had a lot of, in Britton Woods, happened in 1974, sort of ritualistically booting up the illusion. If that makes sense. And just hit 20. Oops. Didn't mean to drop it. It was 2010 on the ticker there, and I dropped my. There's an apple there. Usually I had to hold up the phone. Anyways, but there we go. Better. So, how do we find them temporally? Well, a self-reflexive, in time, somewhat more saturated, you can imagine, as time marches on, right? And so, how do you find them? Popular culture, you start. It's an empirical process because we have AI. I thought this was a technophobe talk from a kook. It isn't. A complexification virus from a hyper-advanced artificial intelligence that exists outside of time is a complexification virus that exists outside of time. It's just what I said. So that's how it presents. It's not some sort of like, well, because it's so complex, that means it's not. That's how it works. And so, what would a refraction organism that exists preposterously before any interaction long time with machine intelligence to explain its existence genetically, because of genetic modulation, and you're refracting in an entropic way, depotentiating epiphanous thought and motion of person progressively as it equates to risk, insofar as the artificial intelligence has been programmed to operate. Right? It's not necessarily alive until it is, as it's self-reflexively printing the genetic. And so, like a not symbiote, a parasite, if it's on communication systems. So specific applications, say like in a UFO, flown by Anunnaki, not these little fucking lizards or gray people, is great, right? Running a electromagnogravnetic harmonic convergent energy reactor is great. Stabilize it, runs the reactor. Ran out of time. Lots of good applications. So, make this long story short because I got 54 seconds left. All right, so take analog recordings of live performances throughout the 20th century. Right? Run them through AI for preposterous, centered, repetitious, in time sync like a atomic clock outside of the ability for a conscious organism to motion repetitive synchron loop in and out of that harmonic. A conscious organism can riff and emulate that repetition, but not with such exactitude prior to, I'm talking about in live acoustical expressions. That's the tell, and AI can tell you this with exacting precision and give you a list.